Hi there. Now that we've looked at the various language skills, we've looked at the ways of teaching language skills, we're going to look at some of the approaches to teaching literature. Now, it's very important to remember when we are teaching literature, much as we are hopefully imparting to our learners a real love of the written word and a real sense of appreciation for the beauty of the texts available to them, we are also using literature to teach the language skills. So we're teaching reading, but we're also teaching speaking because we're getting the learners to read aloud. We're getting them to discuss what they've read. We are teaching them listening. If you are reading aloud to them, they have to listen to understand. We're teaching them structures and conventions by pointing out how the language has been put together. We're also teaching writing and presenting because they have to present their ideas on the text. They have to write about the text. So all of these skills are brought together in teaching literature. But how do we go about teaching literature? Well, there are four main approaches, but it's very important to remember that you are very unlikely to only use one of these approaches. Sometimes one approach is going to be far more applicable, but it's highly, highly, highly unlikely, and I cannot think of a single text where you will use only one of these approaches. Now, certain texts lend themselves more to certain approaches, and some don't apply. So the first one, for example, the chronological approach. How the literature fits into or stands out from the era in which it was written. Now, we've got two ways of looking at this, and the first is we are looking at it from a historical point of view. So if you look at Sonnet 130, My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, if you really want a deep appreciation of that poem, you have to realize that it's actually a parody of the other poems of the time, because it was the fashion to write poems that described their beloveds as goddesses and as these perfect images that are so far out of reach, whereas Shakespeare is in fact mocking that tradition. So you've got that's historical effect. You've got, for example, The Great Gatsby, where you need to understand a bit about the 1920s in order to fully understand what is going on in the novel. If you don't understand bootlegging, if you don't understand prohibition, then it's not going to make a huge amount of sense. Also, are you looking at, for example, futuristic novels? Are they set in a different time and place? How does that affect the way in which we read the text? Then we have the author approach, and that is how the author's life background and contextual factors affect the text. Now, sometimes that is not really relevant. Sometimes knowing the background of how a piece of literature came into being and who the author was, what was going on at that time, will help you to understand the piece and to appreciate it more. For example, World War I poetry. It would help you to know if the poet had been a soldier on the front lines. That will add a level of understanding to the poem. Then we have the theme approach. You will use this in nearly every single piece of literature that you teach. In fact, every single piece of literature that you teach, you will use the theme approach. And that is to break down the dominant themes. Every piece of literature has themes, so that is how you are going to approach that. Finally, we have the genre approach. Now, that is when we are looking at the conventions of the genre of the literature. So, non-fiction autobiographies will have certain rules and expectations.